Nye, the science guy, has done a bunch of internet videos on the subject. Chelsea Clinton often tweets about it passionately. This stuff is serious, okay? How serious? Well, here's the scientific consensus on what will happen if we don't immediately pass some sort of democratic global warming bill. Watch.
This city is headed for a disaster of biblical proportion.
What do you mean, biblical?
What he means is Old Testament, Mr.
Yes.
Mayor. Real wrath of God type stuff.
Exactly.
Fire and brimstone coming down from the skies. Rivers and seas boiling.
40 years of darkness, earthquakes, volcanoes.
The dead rising from the grave.
Human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria.
Sorry, that was from 1984. It's a clip from Ghostbusters. But things have gotten much more dire since then. Human sacrifice, the dead rising from the grave, cats and dogs living together, those were the old predictions. We'd be lucky to get off that easy now. A new generation of Democratic office holders is thinking bigger than that and far more apocalyptically. Move over, Al Gore. These kids are serious. Watch.
We're like, the world is going to end in 12 years if we don't address climate change. And your biggest issue is... Your biggest issue is how are we going to pay for it? And like, this is the war. This is our World War II.
Okay, so to recap the terms of this conversation, this is a matter of total war. The world will end if we lose that war. Any consideration of cost is immoral. That's what they're saying. This is not the language of compromise and moderation. It is the language of fundamentalist theology. Just a few years ago, they were telling us we could fight global warming with carbon offsets and slightly higher gas taxes. Now they're demanding that we give up airplanes and walk to work. But you got to give it this. The Green New Deal does make a kind of internal sense. Hysterical predictions require hysterical reactions. Half measures don't cut it when you're fighting a world war for the future of this planet. Maybe that's why Democrats seem all in on this. Every single Democratic senator running for the Democratic nomination right now has endorsed the Green New Deal. Cory Booker, a vegan lawyer who represents Wall Street, describes the fight against carbon as at least as morally significant as the fight against Adolf Hitler. Watch this.
There's a lot of people now that are blowing back on the Green New Deal. They're like, oh, it's impractical. Oh, it's too expensive. Oh, it's all of this. If we used to govern our dreams that way, we would have never gone to the moon. And when the planet has been in peril in the past, who came forward to save Earth from the scourge of Nazi and totalitarian regimes? We came forward.
Who came forward when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor? We did. Okay, we give up. Let's take this seriously for a minute because it is at the very center of our national conversation. Let's concede that global warming imperils the Earth and that we need a mass mobilization of Americans to fight it. Solar-powered landing craft on the beaches of this generation's Normandy. No cost is too high, no sacrifice too extreme. Cory Booker is our Patton. Let's stipulate that's all true and not flagrantly insane. Who exactly is our enemy in this war? Well, carbon, of course. Carbon is poison. Al Gore told us that 25 years ago. And who is the biggest carbon dealer on planet Earth, the El Chapo of CO2? You probably assume it's America because nobody has bothered to update you on this question. But in fact, it's not America. It's not even close to America. It's China. China is now the undisputed kingpin in the carbon trade. China throws more than twice the amount of deadly carbon into the atmosphere than this country does. China is the problem. And that's true even if you're just a regular environmentalist who still believes in the Earth and are skeptical of received climate theology, because China is also the biggest physical polluter in the world. China dumps almost as much non-degradable plastic into the oceans as the rest of the world combined. They have not banned drinking straws in Shanghai. So it's pretty clear. If you're worried about killing polar bears and poisoning fish with mercury, you should be very worried about China, because they're the ones who are doing it. But nobody in our ruling class seems to know this or care. You don't see Democratic activists or professional environmentalists camped outside the Chinese embassy in protest. Nobody's demanding sanctions on China till they stop polluting. That screechy moron Ocasio-Cortez isn't telling China to give up coal and oil and natural gas and nuclear power within a decade. No way. The left isn't doing any of that because the left loves the Chinese government. It's their model for governing. Just a few years ago, the California governor, Jerry Brown, flew all the way to the Chinese mainland to praise its fascist government for its environmental leadership. For real. You see what's going on. The Green New Deal is not about the environment, just like gun control is not about school shootings, and speech codes have nothing to do with sensitivity. Nothing is what they say it is. What it's really about is punishment and control. The Green New Deal is a religious document. It punishes America for the sins of its prosperity. The only atonement it offers is turning over full control of the entire U.S. economy to the Democratic Party. That's the indulgence they require. They're using moral blackmail to get it. Of course they are. Theocrats always do. Nate Lerner is executive director of Build the Wave, and he joins us tonight. So, Nate, we're being told that we need to fight World War II on behalf of the environment, but fight it against ourselves, is what they're saying. We have to wage war on our own economy. Why wouldn't we be turning this effort outward toward the world's biggest polluter, China, and forcing them to clean up the globe? Why aren't we doing that?
Yeah, that's a really fair question, but how can we ask China to step up to the plate if we're not doing it ourselves? Ocasio-Cortez, for example, is in no position to demand that of China when our own government refuses to invest the funds and resources that we need to into changing our energy infrastructure. So we need to start leading the way on this. We need to start showing that this is something that can work and create jobs and strengthen the economy, then ask them to join us.
Okay, well, I get it. I mean, I've heard that argument's, I mean, that's been the kind of way that the left evades the question for the past 25 years. But the new numbers
answers
show...
it.
Well, it's not really an answer because China emits double the CO2 more than the United States does. In fact, if you
they're
combine
3 or 4 times the size of us.
Oh, okay, but you're making excuses for them. We're talking about the future of the Earth here. We could be gone in 12 years. This is an existential crisis. I'm taking the rhetoric of the left seriously, but they're not taking their own rhetoric seriously, because if they did, they would assign actual blame to the world's actual largest polluter, and that's China. But instead they make excuses like, well, China just needs inspiration from our moral leadership. No, why don't we say to China, this is a war. You're the enemy because you are destroying the protective ozone layer that protects the planet, and we're going to force you to change your ways. Why don't we do that?
All right, there's a lot of things to unpack there. Let's start with the rhetoric. This is not rhetoric that the world will end in 12 years. What Ocasio-Cortez was referencing was the UN Panel on Climate Change's report that came out recently that said if global energy infrastructure does not dramatically change in the next 12 years, it will be too late. So if we don't drastically change the way we produce energy, we're in 12 years from now. Right. Well, no, it's not.
It's
the same
really
point.
No, but it's really the point that you're making is it's really serious, and
it's very serious.
I don't know if that's known or not, actually, but I'm assuming that you're right, and I'm taking your assumption and reaching the logical conclusion, which is if this is really serious, we need to get after the people who are causing it, and it's China. And you made excuses for their behavior by saying that they can't really do anything until we lead the way. And
I didn't say that. No.
Well, you did.
I said we are not in a position to approach them and ask them to join us.
Aren't we citizens of this globe?
We pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement.
The Paris Climate Agreement didn't ask them to reduce their carbon. What? No, it actually allowed them to increase the carbon they emit into the atmosphere.
But that's an example of where the U.S.'s priorities are right now.
That's insane. If you really believe this, then why aren't you telling the biggest polluter in the world to knock it off?
We absolutely should, but first we need to do it here domestically. And also, if you look at China, this is a completely false narrative that they're not investing anything. That they're not investing anything right now in green energy, because they are. They are reducing greatly.
I don't know what green energy is. I'm just telling you because it's such a large category, it has no meaning. I want to go to the science. And the science tells us they're emitting more than twice the carbon that we are. And yet you're making excuses for them and saying, well, we need to do it first because why? That's like saying we can't fight an authoritarian regime because we have voter fraud problems. No, they're destroying the earth and you're making excuses for them. And so all the environmental groups are taking their money. And don't you think you should be ashamed for doing that?
we're not taking the Chinese money. First of all,
yes, they are.
First of all, I'm not saying that the Chinese should not step up to the table. Absolutely not.
Step up to the table. They're destroying the earth.
They should absolutely join us in this. Of course, I'm calling on them to do that. Of course, they need to be part of this just as much as we are. But I'm saying that we cannot politically approach them
from a geopolitical. This is not geopolitical. It's moral.
How is our government supposed to go ask them to join us when we're not even doing this ourselves?
You're telling me that we need to shut down every.
We need to put our money where our mouth
plant.
is.
Yeah. Why? It's not about our money. It's about saving the earth. I'm using the rhetoric, which is a moral rhetoric, not an economic rhetoric, a moral rhetoric of every Democratic presidential candidate right now today, and applying it to a foreign country that they like much more than they like the United States, and you're making excuses for that country. I honestly don't understand why.
I'm approaching this from a very logical standpoint when saying that the U.S. government cannot demand. They should demand, but it's not going to be effective unless we're also doing it ourselves. How does that not make sense? You can't tell someone to join you in a fight if you're not fighting that fight yourself.
Really? Okay.
You say, go fight climate change. We'll do it too. Don't worry about it. We need to show them we are invested in this.
You're missing it. I don't think you're updated on the numbers. They're polluting twice as much as we are. They're the world's biggest polluter by a factor of 100%. So it's not like we need to lead the way. They need to lead the way. Oh, you're making excuses for them again.
We are America. Why shouldn't we be leading the way in this fight? I'm not
so we have a higher standard here. I see.
Of course, we do have a higher standard. We're the United States of America.
So we have to wage World War II against ourselves. That's exactly what you're saying.
We should have the Chinese join us, but we cannot fight. We cannot expect them to join us in this fight if we are doing it ourselves. I don't understand how you're not getting this.
Because it's their crime, and we should hold them accountable for it. Just my view.
We should. You are absolutely right. We should hold them accountable, but we need to hold ourselves accountable too.
We're the guilty ones. I get it. Okay, Nate, thank you very much. High-speed rail is central to the Green New Deal, which says that rail would replace cars. Okay, does high-speed rail work? Has it been tried anywhere? How about our biggest state, California, which was trying to build a high-speed rail line between its two biggest cities, San Francisco and L.A., and yet yesterday it canceled that route. Why? Because it didn't work. The cost rose to a staggering $77 billion. Chuck DeVore has watched this up close. He's a former California State Assemblyman and vice president of the National Initiatives of the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and he joins us tonight. So, Chuck, what was suddenly a California story is now a national story because light rail is a centerpiece of the Green New Deal. Why didn't it work in California?
Well, it got too expensive. The travel times were way too slow. The ticket prices were about double what you'd pay for Southwest Airlines. And it became very apparent that they promised something that they couldn't deliver. They said they were going to have this project that would have all this private money and investment that wouldn't have to cause taxes to go up. Look, they haven't gotten a penny in private investment. The federal government's put $3.5 billion into it. And now they're in material breach of their agreement with the federal government. I think the federal government should ask for that money back and use it to build the wall.
So I'm just a little bit confused because it sounds like it's not that it didn't work in California. It sounds like it was a flaming disaster. It was a fireball of lies and embarrassment. And so why would you take that and make it the centerpiece of your energy policy?
Well, you had a lot of crony corporatism and big labor involved in selling this to the public. So it narrowly passed in 2008 with Obama at the top of the ticket, got 52.7% of the vote. It was backed by corporations like Siemens, the locomotive manufacturer out of Germany, and big labor. And it's basically been a crony corporate gravy train from day one. Now, the problem is, at the rate they're spending money, they wouldn't finish the route for about 100 years. And as I recall, we're all supposed to be dead by then. Isn't that how it's supposed to work?
Actually, I think it's 12 years. So I guess what you're saying is they're paying off their campaign contributors and calling it environmental policy. I think I've seen that before. Chuck DeVore, I appreciate your coming on and clarifying.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Tucker.
We have a Fox News alert for you. Congress on the brink, apparently, of working out a government funding deal to end the shutdown over a border wall. David Spunt has some new exclusive reporting on where we are in those negotiations, and he joins us right now. David?
Hey, Tucker, good evening. Well, some members of Congress are clearly in favor of this border security package. Others say not so much. President Trump has made it very clear he's unhappy about the language, but we're told all indications are that the president will sign it. In fact, the White House hasn't even seen the final package at this point. We're told that text is being worked out, but the president and his team will see it at some point tomorrow. February 15th is the deadline. That is Friday for members of Congress to get a package to the president. Now, we're told that it's possible there could be another shutdown. However, President Trump has backed away from that in recent days. Tucker, tonight we're learning Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, he's expressing concern and accused Democrats of adding what are called poison pill provisions into the deal. Now, a source tells Tucker Carlson tonight one one of those provisions allows small town mayors to veto any part of a wall built in their specific jurisdictions. Democratic aides tell Fox News they're optimistic the bill will pass in the House, but there is Democratic concern that conservatives may turn some fellow Republicans against the deal that would fund the wall, not at $5.7 billion, but instead $1.4 billion for an additional 55 miles of a barrier. Now, Tucker, late this afternoon, the House Freedom Caucus talked about introducing a continuing resolution to fund the government for another week, basically just kicking this down the road for another week, resetting while these negotiations continue. If that doesn't happen, tomorrow is expected to be the final vote. The deadline is Friday, so certainly we'll be in the 11th hour on this budget battle. Tucker.
Cliffhanger after cliffhanger. David Spunforce, thank you very much.
Sure.
Congressman Ilhan Omar is becoming a standard bearer of the Democratic Party. If you want to know what they think, listen to her. But apparently, and this is interesting, she is immune from criticism. We learned that today. Why is that? I'll tell you after the break. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar is picking another fight, this time over sports. In a new letter to USA Powerlifting, Omar attacks the organization because it opposes having a biological male compete against women in a lifting competition. Omar claims, ludicrously, that biological males have no advantage over women. That's in defiance of about 1 million years or so of evidence to the contrary. It doesn't matter, though. Omar's letter is just the latest case of powerful people on the left bullying anyone they can't control. You saw the same thing with the gay marriage debate. Any Christian-owned bakery that doesn't want to bake a gay wedding cake risks fines, lawsuit, and ruin. Okay, so those are the new rules. So what about Muslim-owned bakeries? Do the rules apply there too? Stephen Carter asked that question a while back, and he found pretty much what you'd expect. Lots of Muslim-owned bakeries will not bake gay wedding cakes, and we're not complaining about that. Private business owners shouldn't be forced to engage in speech they find immoral. But the left doesn't agree. So where's the letter from Congresswoman Omar demanding that Muslim bakeries who won't bake these cakes be shut down? We're still looking for that letter. And what about Omar's own mosque, by the way? Does it perform gay marriages? And if it doesn't, has she complained about that? Has she denounced them? We called her office today to find out. They haven't replied yet. We suspect we'll be waiting a while for an answer, but we're always open to one. Congresswoman Omar is starting a lot of fights recently. For a newcomer, she's in the center of many news stories. Today on Capitol Hill, she berated the new envoy to Venezuela, Elliot Abrams, accusing him of being a liar and attacking him over the Iran-Contra affair that took place more than 30 years ago. Here's part of it.
More than 800 civilians, including children as young as 2 years old, were brutally murdered by U.S.-trained troops. You later said that the U.S. policy in El Salvador was a fabulous achievement. Yes or no, do you think that massacre was a fabulous achievement that happened under our watch?
That is a ridiculous question, and I
yes or no?
No.
I will.
Sorry, Mr.
I will
Chairman,
take that as a yes.
I am not going to respond to that kind of personal attack.
Congresswoman Omar is herself, of course, a refugee to this country. She was born in Mogadishu. She spent most of her time, at least her political life, attacking this country as immoral. She also supports a number of policy ideas like the Green New Deal that don't make mathematical sense. She's also for abolishing ICE. So there are things you could criticize about the Congresswoman, but you're not allowed to criticize her. A new piece in Politico argued that. Now, why? Well, not because what she says is factually true, but because, of course, of her identity. Quote, the GOP strategy risks a backlash. A party that has problems with women and minorities continues to focus its attacks on women of color, end quote. Not on women it disagrees with, but on women of color. Their color is the most important part to the people at Politico. MSNBC agreed with this, of course. In a segment yesterday, one of its guests said that it was, quote, not a good look for conservatives to attack Congresswoman Omar because she's a woman. Her actual views are irrelevant. It's about her identity. Michelle Malkin is a syndicated columnist and author, and she joins us tonight. Michelle, thanks very much for coming on. I think a lot of things about this, but one of them is that the rest of us are deprived an interesting debate over the issues when that debate is shut down on the basis of immutable characteristics. You know, you're this color, the person you're talking about is that color, no more conversation. We don't even get to hear what the issues are.
Yeah, it is cheating the American public of a true, honest, and vigorous debate on very important policy matters. And I also feel a little bit left out, Tucker, because this immunity shield is only provided to certain privileged women of color who claim a certain ideology. Over the last 25 centuries, I've never had this privilege. Who's handing out the Wonder Woman bracelets that can deflect all bullets of criticism? Because I've never gotten one. And it's that double standard of the attacks that women and people of color who are conservative or limited government or libertarian never enjoy, that Ilhan Omar has. And it's not just the left that claims this privilege for these radical, racist, hateful women like Ilhan Omar. Unfortunately, you've got enablers in the Beltway who call them conservatives, like Jennifer Rubin at the Washington Post, carrying water for these people. And you look at the hearing today that you showed a little clip of. What was that? It was coordinated kabuki theater. Code Pink has achieved its dream of having essentially an ideological intern now sitting on the other side of the aisle carrying water for them. Amazing.
What I find so striking, though, is that if you're making the argument that people of one color should be allowed to say one thing, and people of another color can't say that thing because of their color, that's by definition a racist argument. You are a racist if you are making that argument, again, by definition. And yet it's the same people who make that argument who are always denouncing everyone else as racists.
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
Well, you know, I've diagnosed this, at least online, as what I call Silicon Valley Sharia. Because the perfect example, of course, is that Ilhan Omar is allowed to tweet these heinous, vile things, while a Jewish woman who was the first to criticize her before she was elected, when people should have been listening, Laura Loomer, is banned from Twitter. This is insanity when you have Louis Farrakhan, I guess a man of color, who's allowed to call Jews termites on Twitter. He's still on Twitter, and Ilhan Omar is still on Twitter, and the brave critics of jihad and this narrowing of what's allowed in public debate are increasingly being deplatformed. And it is because these people on the left smell fear, Tucker Carlson, that they've been able to get away with it.
Well, I totally agree with that. And it's because the cowardice of a lot of people in Washington who should be defending their people and the right to speak honestly in public have run away and caved. I agree with that completely, Michelle Malkin. Thank you for saying that. Michelle Malkin, as always. Well, we're not allowed to have voter ID, we're told, because it's a form of voter suppression. Is that actually true? As a factual matter, as a matter of social science? Well, thank heaven somebody decided to run the numbers on that and check. And we've got the findings for you after the break. Modern country requires a photo ID to vote, but when American states try to implement the same laws, they are, of course, described as racist bigots engaged in voter suppression. That's fake, of course. It's all diversion. That's a lie, and you should ignore it. But now a new study shows just how fake it is. 2 university professors took a look at voting patterns in 10 different states, and they found that voter ID laws had no effect at all on how much each group was able to vote. It turns out that legal voters are perfectly able to get photo identification, something you knew already, and that these laws are only a problem if you want to vote illegally. But helping people to vote illegally is, of course, the entire point of preventing voter ID laws, as we knew. Harmeet Dillon is an attorney who covers this kind of thing, and she joins us tonight. Harmeet, so it seems like the evidence is pretty clear on this from this study.
Yes, actually, Tucker, these 2 economics professors, one at Harvard Business School and the other in University of Bologna, used data from a liberal progressive database called Catalyst, which works with progressive groups on these issues. And they examined 1.3 billion different data points. And they had data on gender, race, sex, gender, and political affiliation. And they were able to compare the states that had the strong voter ID laws, the 10 of them, against the ones that don't. And there was statistically no difference whatsoever. And so that really rebuts the left's mythology that voter ID laws are directed at suppressing particularly the minority vote. et cetera, on the theory that elderly or minority or poor people are unable to get ID. I mean, you and I know that you can't operate in society today without ID, and we need it for so many reasons. So I think this is really encouraging data.
Yeah, you can't have a job, you can't fly on an airplane, you can't cash a check, you can't get government benefits, you can't do anything. So it was prima facie absurd, but they still wax self-righteous about it, and any attempt to prevent voter fraud is suppression, and you're Bull Connor. I wonder if the right, if Republicans will begin to do something they almost never do on any topic, which is push back with facts against this demagoguery.
Well, you know, you raise a good point, Tucker. We as Republicans tend to become very intimidated when anybody says the R word. Oh, you're racist. Yeah. You know, you're racist. And we really buy into that demagoguery and back down. And I hope to see more Republicans step forward and say, we are not racist. We are trying to protect the integrity of every single vote. You know, I'm an immigrant to this country, and the right to vote is very precious and something that people don't have around the world. And so the way we casually water it down in this country by allowing people to vote who are not entitled to vote, we have 3 million illegal aliens plus in California, for example, is really shocking, and it's time for it to stop. So I'm glad to see this data from not from a conservative source, but from objective professors, economists, and I hope that we will begin to start pushing back on this false narrative by the left.
Well, yeah, because the only reason they keep using it is because it works, and Republicans run and hide every single time. I mean, is there any other reason to oppose voter ID laws except to abet voter fraud?
I can't think of any. And on the flip side, and as these two professors point out in their study, the effect of voter ID laws does increase confidence among the voting population in the outcomes of these elections, and we certainly need more of that as well.
Yeah, that is such a smart point. I'm losing confidence. I've always had confidence in our system, but not anymore. Harmeet, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thanks, Tucker.
Well, in so many stories recently, you may have noticed the press rushed to judgment before the facts came in. Russia! The boys from Covington, and now the story around Jussie Smollett, the actor in Chicago. The press seems to keep reaching premature conclusions, but always conclusions that favor the Democratic Party. Why is that? After the break, we'll tell you. It's been 2 weeks now since actor Jussie Smollett said that he was attacked in a racially motivated hate crime outside his apartment in Chicago. So far, police have not found the perpetrators. They have not found videotape of the perpetrators in a neighborhood festooned with CCTV cameras. And they have rejected the phone records that Smollett gave them, saying that they are heavily redacted and insufficient. Some other parts of the story are coming under fire as well tonight. Trace Gallagher has been following this investigation and joins us with the latest. Trace?
Hi, Tucker. In his first interview since he was allegedly attacked, Empire star Jussie Smollett emotionally told Good Morning America that he's, quote, pissed off. Watch.
What is it that has you so angry? Is it the attackers?
It's the attackers, but it's also the attacks.
Meaning those who are now skeptical of his story. Smollett claims that 2 weeks ago he went to a 24-hour Subway sandwich shop near downtown Chicago, and on the way home, two men shouting racist and homophobic slurs beat him up, poured bleach on him, tied a string noose around his neck, and yelled, "This is MAGA country." Chicago police have said his story is credible, but so far have been unable to find any supporting evidence. They do have surveillance video showing Smollett before and after the alleged attack, but nothing of the attack itself, and no video of any suspects. Smollett claims during the attack he was on the phone with his manager, but when he finally turned over his phone records, Chicago police rejected them because they were heavily redacted. That's key because the manager says he heard the attackers shouting homophobic and racial epithets. Smollett says the records were blacked out to protect the privacy of his contacts. Initially, Smollett really received outpouring of support, but one of his neighbors now tells our corporate cousin in the New York Post he doesn't believe him because half the neighborhood is gay, the other half is black. Tucker.
Thanks a lot, Trace. Yep. Well, it's looking increasingly possible that the attack you just heard about may not have been the attempted lynching it has been hyped as, but it doesn't matter. It's too late now. To those who only casually follow the news, they will hear only the press's initial breathless coverage, which treated the incident as an obvious hate crime. Yet another consequence of Donald Trump's America, another Trump voter bashing someone on the street. Some parts of the media are still treating the story that way, despite what we have learned in the last 2 weeks. A recent piece in the online website, apparently, Daily Beast, argued that we should believe Smollett on the basis of his skin color. Well, that sort of openly racist, politically motivated journalism is increasingly the norm. Covington worked the same way. Supposedly, we could tell that a few high school boys were evil because of the way they looked, and the way they smiled, and the way their parents presumably voted. Or take a look at BuzzFeed's supposed smoking gun of the president ordering his lawyer to lie to Congress. There was no proof it was true. There never was any proof of it. But because it matched an established narrative, everybody knew what to call it.
This would be certainly a bombshell information.
BuzzFeed's latest bombshell report.
The White House is slamming a bombshell report by BuzzFeed.
With a bombshell report from BuzzFeed.
If the BuzzFeed bombshell is true.
Bombshell report.
Thesaurus, please. Dumb people have a weakness for news cliches. It's unbelievable. Stuff like that happens every couple of weeks, but nobody in the press ever seems to learn or change. Why is that? Joe Concha writes about this stuff for a living for the Hill newspaper, and he joins us tonight. So, Joe, I'm recognizing a repetitive pattern of behavior where people who are supposed to soberly digest the facts and bring them to the public are instead jumping to wild conclusions that comport with their political beliefs and then not apologizing or changing. Why is that?
Because, Tucker, how do you learn from when you're a little kid all the way through when you're an adult with a career? You learn by being held accountable for things.
No,
so if you
right.
make a major mistake, and it's funny because we talked about this, the mistakes are never made. Let's put it this way. When was the last time you ever saw a major mistake in any big journalism piece by any big outlet against a Democratic lawmaker? But when mistakes are made, there's never, almost, with exceptions, ramifications, suspensions, actual firing. So if you know you can get away with something, you just keep doing it. But one thing I'm noticing with this story here, Tucker, is if you Google Jussie Smollett and attack, almost every headline I see says attack. There is no word, it's very key here, before it, alleged attack. When you take alleged out, it becomes fact, like Pearl Harbor was attacked. When you take alleged out, suddenly it becomes absolute truth. So in this case, let's put it this way. If I'm a journalist, I remove the noise here. I remove the fact that Smollett's a celebrity. I remove the fact that he's anti-Trump. Big, that's not a big surprise. I remove the fact that these were pro-Trump alleged attackers that went after him. And I want to find evidence to support the claim. How do you find the evidence? Smollett said he was on the phone during the attack with his manager. All right, so man says he was attacked by two men, right? So if he's on the phone, then therefore he should turn over his phone records. When he does, he heavily redacts them. And his excuse is that he doesn't want the Chicago police to see his contacts? Okay, how about the manager? Has he turned over his phone? Reportedly, he hasn't. So when you take that evidence out of this story, you have to question it. So when I watch that interview tomorrow with Robin Roberts on ABC, she better press him on that point. Yeah. Why wouldn't you turn over the only evidence that's available if we haven't seen this on camera?
She's not going to press him on the point. You can be sure. But let me ask you this. So I almost feel, it looks to me like maybe this guy got over his skis, made up the story. We've seen this a lot. Maybe it's real. I don't know. But I do know that two sitting U.S. senators, Harris and Booker, both immediately issued statements calling this a lynching. Now, that scares people. It divides the country. It's racially inflammatory. If it turns out this isn't real, should they be forced to apologize for doing that?
And the only way they'll apologize, Tucker, is if the press presses them on that. You made this comment. You read back the comment. Now we've learned, and again, we don't know, but let's say we do learn, what do you have to say now? You know that's not going to happen. And look, it's that theme that we talked about over and over again. All Trump stories, not all, almost all, come from a foundation of guilty. Whether that's, yes, Trump must have collusion with the Russians, therefore he's guilty. The Covington kids must have attacked the Native American, therefore he's guilty. When you come from that foundation, of course these are the conclusions that are going to be drawn, Tucker.
That's exactly right. We've known this for generations. Any good editor makes certain that his reporters are honest enough not to act like this, but nobody cares anymore. No one's honest. Joe Concha, thank you. Great to see you.
Good to see you.
Well, the Trump administration is pushing for nationwide paid family leave. What would it be like for America to have a truly pro-family government policy? And is that one of those policies? We know at least one country that's trying to make its politics help and protect families. And we're going to speak to an official from that country.